He grew up watching his dad build one of the most respected companies in storage with his mom right there by dad's side. Now he's carving out his own niche in the industry. Today, on Stories Behind the Door podcast, Noah Woolsey of Kiwi 2. Well, it wasn't just a career choice for today's guest. He grew up in the business, from watching projects come out of the ground as a kid to now helping grow one of the most respected steel companies in the industry. He spent nearly 3 decades watching the incredible evolution of the self-storage industry. Welcome to Stories Behind the Door podcast. I'm your host, Thaddeus Campbell. He, of course, is Noah Woolsey of Kiwi 2. I'm going to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, which Noah just happens to work for. Love that Kiwi 2 makes these conversations possible. Every once in a while, we have an employee of Kiwi 2 on the show. If you're building ground up in self-storage or small bay flex, reach out to them at kiwisteel.com. The earlier you get them involved in a project, the more they can put 30 plus years of steel construction to work, helping make sure your ground up development is a success. Noah, I always start the podcast off with the same question. Before I do that, I want to just make a quick note. We both need to update our mug shots. I had hair on top of my head in my mugshot. You had no facial hair on yours, which I'm still blown away at 27 years old. You got an absolutely fantastic beard. Story for another day. We're going to start the podcast with the same question we always do, which is, you obviously were born into this industry. What got you to choose to follow a career in self-storage?
Yeah, my dad was always in it, always saw him, working hard and doing his thing. And, having the ability to work for your dad is something that you don't always get that opportunity. And, coming out of college, it was like, well, I could do this, or, and he kind of laid out like, you can do whatever you want, but if you want, I'd love for you to come work for me. It's a great consistent industry, and hey, here's your opportunity. And I took it. I thought it was a great opportunity, and yeah.
Listen, no doubt that the company that your father and his partners have built over the last 30 plus years has a tremendous respect in the industry and has done great work. Interestingly, you came out of college and went to work for Kiwi back in the early 2020s. The industry was kind of booming right when you started out. Hasn't been so much on the flip side of that the last couple of years. What's that been like for you? As you've kind of, obviously you grew up in it and you've kind of seen the waves and watching your dad, but for you being involved in it, what have the last few years been like?
Yeah, I understand everything's cyclical, like every other business. We're obviously in a slower time, but just understanding that, you take the good with the bad and you just keep working hard like you always have been, and trying to bring in as much business as you can.
Talk to me about what was it for you? You obviously had this choice, and I'm lucky. I got to work with my dad for almost a decade, and it's truly special and something that I would encourage anyone, if you have the opportunity to do it. Beyond the fact that your dad obviously has such a standing and a reputation, what was it about storage and about Kiwi 2 specifically that really made it an exciting thing for you to want to go do?
I've been interested in sales roles, and I didn't start in sales at Kiwi too, but learning estimating and getting to learn the business from that point of view and working my way into a sales role. I think I enjoyed, just getting to know what my dad did all these years, and I think that I appreciated the industry as a whole. I kind of always tout it as like a interesting but boring business at the same time. Like there's interesting times, but there's like nice, simple facets of it that, the reliability, the consistency, it's a great industry overall. So all of those things were definitely factors in me moving forward and getting into the industry.
Couple questions I want to come out of here, and I'm going to say them now because otherwise I'll forget. The first, I want to talk about your dad and what you've learned from him and what you watched growing up that kind of influences you now. The next one, I want to, yeah, obviously you're in a business development role now, sort of a sales role in the company. I want to talk to you and kind of get your word on what you're hearing from developers and what you're seeing on the ground up side of it, and what that's looking like after we've obviously had over the last few years as interest rates shot up and construction costs went up markedly, a little bit of a slowdown on that side of it. I'm going to start with your dad, who is one of the first people I got to know in the industry and have tremendous respect for. Tell me, for you growing up in the family, what was it like watching him help build this company, and what is it you took away from him that you try and bring into what you're doing?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is work ethic. You could just tell behind the scenes, almost every night he wouldn't bring work home with him in the like emotional or anything like that sense. Like he tried to keep work completely separate from home life. But he would be at the kitchen table working almost every single night. He would have his contracts or his plans or whatever he was needing to get done that night before the next day came, and he'd be working till 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night at times, just growing the business. And I think that work ethic, seeing that and being like, okay, I could build something too, either with him or on my own. And I think with him is what I ultimately chose to do.
Don't question that choice for you at all, knowing your dad the way I do. I would want to work with him too, which is really cool. And to your point, we were talking about this off camera, right? I have a 15-year-old, and we were talking about a plan I have for Saturday, and it was interfering with another plan. And like she was blown away by the idea of doing two things in the same day. How important and how much do you value having grown up around somebody who could A, kind of compartmentalize, and this is something I've talked to your dad about on the podcast actually, know how to get home at 5 o'clock and spend some quality time with the family. But on the flip side of it, at 8, 9 o'clock at night, when that part of it's settled down, go back to work, and go get done what needs to get done. How much did you value being around that as a kid and kind of seeing that work ethic firsthand?
I think as a kid at first, you're just like, "Oh, dad's working." You don't really like fully comprehend it until you get to the point where like I didn't really fully comprehend it, I would say, until I was in the industry with him and I saw his day to day. Like you don't really understand anyone's day to day until you actually see it, and that completely changed and understanding like he was still doing some estimating at that time. Like when I was a kid, he was still part of the estimating team in a sense. And it's like understanding estimating, understanding sales and BD, like you're saying, it's like all of that was under his umbrella, so he definitely, just understanding all of that and what he was doing, it gives you a better appreciation of it.
Talk to me a little bit about the company. When I talk to developers all the time, and I'm relatively new in the industry. I got my first job in self storage in 2021. August 8th will be 5 years for me, which is hard to believe. Actually, it's hard to believe it's been 5 years, but that's a whole different story. Universally, as I talk to developers, Kiwi isn't held in such high regard, right? People value, and not just developers, but like if I'm talking to people from Extra Space or people from Public Storage, CubeSmart, like the cream of the crop of operators in the storage industry, just hold your company in such high regard. What is it, do you think, over the 30 plus years that Kiwi's been putting up steel that has led to that kind of the one thing I've never heard anyone badmouth your company. Not one time have I heard somebody say, "I would never work with them again." Frequently, I hear, "Man, they solved the problem. Man, they sent an extra crew onto site." So, what is it, do you think, Noah Woolsey, that has led to that reputation that you guys have built in the industry?
I think it's a value of, trust in us that people give us, relationships and putting forth the effort of, hey, either if we mess something up, we're going to fix it right away. Or if we're doing everything right, we're going to do it on time and when we say we're going to do it. I think that those are huge factors, and I think that once people use you once and use us once specifically, they understand it's like, okay, these guys know what they're doing. We're going to use them again. I think once people walk in our door and they experience us for the first time, I think they're gonna love us and want to use us again, and that's our goal. We want to do things right the first time and just keep on doing them right.
Love that. I'm gonna transition into the second question that I told you I was gonna ask, which is about, you're obviously on the front line. I see you at trade shows all the time, although I haven't been going to as many storage trade shows lately, which I'm a little bit sad about. But I get to see you at trade shows, and I know that you're talking to developers about projects constantly, even when you're not at trade shows. Talk to me about the reality as we're in July of 2026. Everyone's talking about, deliveries are going to be further down than they were in the last couple years. What are you guys seeing as far as storage projects? Are you seeing things kind of slow down still? Are you starting to see a pickup a little bit? Tell me what the reality is on the ground as far as ground up construction.
Yeah, I'd say it varies regionally. I'd say the West Coast is still staying fairly busy, as it compares to the East Coast. I would say the East Coast has kind of come more to a standstill than the West for sure. I would say a lot of times, because I deal mostly on the East Coast,
I was
we're
going to
seeing
say that kind
people.
of isn't the greatest for you with what your
Yeah,
region
yeah,
is, Noah.
you're right. You're right. Can argue with that. But unfortunately, that's just the reality at the moment. Just trying to keep my ear to the ground and talk with people. And I'm hearing a lot of early 2027 breaking ground for a lot of people. I think people are just, okay, I've got this sorted. Now I just want to wait, see what happens. See if I can benefit from waiting a few more months. And I think that a lot of people are just hoping for rates to come down, price of steel to potentially come down, all these things. There's some factors that won't change, but I think that some of those variables they're hoping for a positive change to happen before they commit.
I'm interested obviously we're involved in a couple of projects that are small bay flex, right? Not self storage. I hear about it all the time. I have a little bit of a presence on LinkedIn and people reach out to me about small bay flex all the time. I'm interested for you guys. Are you starting to see more folks coming to you with small bay flex projects? What's that looked like? And has that been something that's kind of helped ease a little bit of the slowdown on the storage side?
Hmm. Yeah, I'd say even before the slowdown, there's small bay flex that has been, growing RV and boat, however you want to put it. There's different verbiage for all of it, but they're definitely leaning towards that, I think. I think leaning more towards being able to do personal, contractor bays, all these kinds of things where there's more of a wide use for them between personal use, commercial, and business use. I think that small bay is definitely becoming more popular in general.
Love to hear that. I'm gonna transition back for a second. I wanna talk. I said this to you off camera before. I We were up in Aspen together in Colorado, and I got a chance to go out. I forgot you were with us, and I'm gonna throw myself under the bus live. You were at the other table with us, but I got to sit down and have dinner with your dad and your mom. And you guys obviously had a big exit at the beginning of this year. Your dad and the partners are still running the company and making 100% of the choices day to day. But it made headlines that Janice bought Kiwi and folded them into the Janice companies. Uh, I'm always intrigued by this, right? Because your mom wasn't necessarily, in a day to day role in Kiwi, but I'd like to know from your perspective, how important was she in what your dad was able to build?
Yeah, they are each other's best supporter, so I would say from that standpoint, just my mom wouldn't go to bed until he went to bed. Like I said about going on the kitchen table after dinner and working, she would hang out with him, whether it was at the table or just hanging on the couch and just being a presence around him, just being that number one supporter for him, I think was huge. I don't know, like he obviously, being the great dad that he is, like the reason he's so successful is he wanted to be a success for his wife and for his kids. And I think that's a huge factor for him.
It was so I was lucky to be at that dinner with my wife. It was the first time I'd ever taken her to a storage thing, and I'm lucky that my wife supports me in that way too, which is unbelievable and important. But it just struck me the way that your dad and your mom were together. I'd never met your mom before that. I'd always just seen your dad, and so to see, and it was obvious, Noah, like it was a team, right? It wasn't like Wayne's there running the dinner and his wife's along for the ride. It was like 2 people that were bonded at the hip, which was really cool and certainly, I think, important. And if you talk to a lot of successful entrepreneurs, that tends to be something that they have. especially entrepreneurs that are not only successful but smiling and happy and
Yeah.
enjoying the journey. So kudos to Anne Marie for being that support for your dad along the course of the journey. I want to talk a little bit about technology. We've obviously, like, 2026 is the year of AI. It's become all the rage. Last year, the year before, we started to kind of get, nibbles of ChatGPT and what it was going to be able to do. Obviously, when I'm looking out my window, by the way, at a Kiwi 2 and A&E Construction 3-story self-storage facility. The shell is almost completely done now, so I can't see the steel frame anymore, but I got to watch you guys put the steel up. Obviously, when the crews are on site and they're erecting steel, AI is not really heavily involved in that piece of the puzzle necessarily, but I'm interested from your perspective. Obviously, you spent some time in the estimating side of it, you now in the BD side of it. How are you guys implementing technology, and what's it doing to help Kiwi 2?
Yeah, I think that we're definitely more on the old school side. We're still, like if I'm gonna estimate, I'm gonna do a hard bid where I'm using a pen. I'm not asking AI or whatever to count how many studs there are. So definitely old school from that perspective. I think from a sales perspective we are as well. I think there's certain on the marketing side where we may be implementing some AI uses, but I'm not aware of that specifically. But I think that the storage industry as a whole is definitely conforming to that. I think a lot more people are implementing using AI or Chat GPT, whatever it may be, to further and kind of ease, themselves of some work where they can use that as a source to get some stuff done.
Love that. I love that kind of old school mentality, right? The idea that there's a reason that you got to where you're at, right? And technology isn't necessarily, you can enhance things, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to change the bones of what you were and have been.
Mm.
I want to ask the next question, which is, 30, I think 1992, 93, your dad started doing the first steel on a storage facility, 30 plus years. Um, you built a reputation. There's constant evolution in any industry, and you guys have new players. Obviously, you got bought out by Janice, and now kind of that, like, we're the big corporate guy. How difficult is it now to maintain the reputation that took 30 years to build, or is it difficult to maintain?
I think we established that, we're the same people, we're the same company. Obviously we're now under the Janus umbrella, but like you said earlier, my dad and Brian, who are the two partners that are still working for QE2, they're still making the calls. They're still there, they're working. I think that obviously Janus is publicly traded, so there's a lot more reporting, that's required of us, but I think other than that, it's business as usual.
Tell me a little bit. Obviously, that got announced back in January. Your dad was gracious enough to sit down with me while we were out in Colorado, and we talked about it a little bit. And that was one thing he was super clear on, right? Like, he's like, I never would have done it if they didn't allow me to make the day to day decisions and keep the control of choosing where we're going to go as a company, which I thought was pretty fantastic. To build a company that gets a purchase price that high from a company like Janice and still be able to maintain that level of control says something about the reputation that Kiwi has built in the industry. What I want to ask you is, obviously you were with the company for a few years before that purchase happened. What has it changed? What did it do for you guys, whether positive or challenging, that the acquisition has allowed or changed for Kiwi over the last 6 months?
Yeah, I would say a lot has stayed the status quo. There's just different transitions, like all the basics, like insurance, things like that, that those are going to automatically change because different companies do different things in different ways. But I would say for the most part, and the day to day for me has not changed. I'm still just getting out there, making phone calls, shooting emails, trying to get business in the door.
Let's talk about that, about the phone calls. And, we talked a little bit about, obviously, the slowdown, but I'm interested to know, what are customers asking of you? What are the expectations that they have for you folks as you're looking to provide steel for projects?
Yeah, I think that there's, like anybody would ask, where's steel pricing at? Where's this, where's that? And it's a lot of repricing because they want to understand. It's like, okay, it's been a month, it's been 2 months, we're still on hold, but can we get a revised price? And we're happy to do that. It's just it can be hard on the downturns because our estimating team can be busy, but we're not necessarily, as quick to sign deals because people are just they're weary. They're weary of the market. They're on hold, and we're just trying to get as much projects through the door as possible. And like you said, phone calls can be dead ends at times. So you just got to keep the grind going and keep making calls.
Interested to know how you guys have seen kind of timeline versus like 2020, 21, 22, when it seemed like things were moving at the speed of light. Um, Are you seeing more of kind of like, hey, something was supposed to start in August, but now it's starting in October or it's starting in January? What's that been like? And is it the reality of what you're seeing first? And then if it is, how do you navigate that? Because you guys are a big company. You got crews, you've got a schedule, you've got to know where they're going. How do you handle kind of a project that was supposed to start in August and all of a sudden it's 2, 3, 6, 8 months delay?
Yeah, yeah, I think that it's just a matter of scale because even in the great times, like you said in 2022 COVID times where we were just roaring and ramping to go, right? There's still people in those times that are on hold for 6 to 8 months. Maybe it's easier because the crews are already busy, so you can allocate them when you need them. But like you said, keeping the crews busy in the downtimes, that can be more of a challenge. So it's understanding we have crews that work in certain regions and certain regions slow down. So we're just doing our best to keep them busy and just it can be hard to keep them busy, so we just try to get the work through the door. Like I said, it's not easy.
Massachusetts and Oregon aren't that much different for climate, like you kind of go where the work is, right? Um, anyway, I digress completely. Couldn't go out without bringing up my home state. I'm interested to know if you're seeing a difference in design. We talked about steel prices. Listen, they've been pretty stable here for a little bit, but they're still higher than they were, especially pre-COVID when that first boom happened. Interest rates obviously significantly higher. Are you guys seeing projects get designed differently? Are people trying to kind of use design as a way to save costs? Or is it like, hey, storage is storage and you just kind of got to try and deal with the reality of what today is like?
I think that a lot of people appreciate what we offer. We do a value engineered design every time. We have our a certain design for each region that we can kind of tweak based on, like California is more seismic based, Florida is more wind load based, so we can tweak that design based on wherever your project is, in order to value engineer it as much as possible.
Dig in a little bit of that. It's funny because I've told you 5 years I've been involved in, I don't know, quite a few ground up development projects at this point in some capacity. Talk to me about that experience level because I'd never heard that before. Like you're dealing with different things in California than you are in Texas or you are in Florida or I brought up Massachusetts where I grew up. How do you guys know how to do that and what value does that bring to somebody on the other end?
Yeah, so we have 3 in-house engineers. So those engineers, they can base, all of their calculations based on the zip code that you give us where your project is located, like Massachusetts. We're gonna be dealing with a lot of snow load. So, beefing up the purlins, beefing up, certain beams, things like that, based on that load on the roof that is coming in. California and Florida, they're their own animal as well. Florida, you've got higher wind loads, so you're just dealing with all those different factors and the engineers, I mean, they're I couldn't do it, but they're incredibly smart and they do their math. It's an equation and they can put that formula in and tell us, okay, you need these purlins with these studs with this. And we're like, okay, we'll do that and we price it and we're ready to go.
Love that. Next question I'm going to ask you, as you guys are talking internally, what do you see shaking out in the next year or 2 years? I know you mentioned earlier you're kind of hearing early 2027. Do you guys believe that? Are you hearing it enough? Where do you think we're going? Are we kind of at the beginning of a recovery? Y CubeSmart just got their rating, upped by one of the 3 ratings bureaus, saying that storage is kind of early in a recovery. I trust you guys more than I trust the the ratings bureaus in Wall Street. Based on what you're hearing, kind of what are you guys planning for as far as storage development going forward?
Yeah, I would say I'm comfortable with saying early 2027. I don't think that we're still going down. I think that the curve is definitely flattened and it's slowly on its way up. It's recovering for sure.
Love that. Next question I want to ask you. We talked a little bit about a small bay industrial flex
Uh-huh.
and how that's kind of, and you mentioned boat and RV storage when I asked the question. What are you seeing in those in terms of where you know more people are tending to trend? Are you still seeing the predominance of what you guys are building be small bay flex? Are you seeing those percentages change at all? Tell me a little bit about, where projects are landing percentage-wise now for Kiwi.
Yeah, I would say the majority is still going to be your standard single or multi-story buildings. That's going to be the standard across the way for anybody, but I think the percentages of small bay flex are going up. It's gaining popularity. I think that in general eh, people like their toys, and I think that storage owners are reflecting that. They're understanding like, hey, people have gotten more toys. The economy for a time, was advantageous where people were getting more toys and they want to build storage to help, people store their toys because apartments are also more popular now, and a lot more apartments are being built. So where are people going to put their stuff?
Kinda saved us in a down housing market, right? That more people are living in apartments and still move relatively frequently. That's been a I know a lot of operators that are very thankful that that trend's happening because the reality is existing home sales are still struggling. God forbid that turns around, our industry is gonna be in for a massive lift. Because
Um,
quite frankly, it's shocking that we've done as well as we have given some of the headwinds that we're dealing with. I wanna pivot a little bit. We talked a lot about work and a lot about Kiwi 2. I wanna know a little bit about Noah Woolsey. When you're not in the offices at Kiwi 2, what are you doing? What keeps you motivated outside of going to work every day?
Yeah, every once in a while I'll play some golf or hang with buddies or, I'm living in East Tennessee, so there's a great lake system. So just jumping out on the lake, whether you're running a boat or jumping on some sea-doos or whatever it may be, just getting on the water in the summertime and in the wintertime, maybe doing some skeet shooting or, just hanging out.
Doing Tennessee things. I love it.
Tennessee things,
This
yeah.
begs the next question. Temecula, California, East Tennessee. Noah Woolsey rating system. And you, for those that don't know, you grew up in California early. I think your parents actually moved out to Tennessee kind of following you, if I'm not totally mistaken there, but you went to school in Tennessee, if I'm not wrong.
So I went to school in Colorado,
All
actually,
right, I lied.
in Denver. But either way, yeah. So came back from college, and we had some friends that moved out to Tennessee, and we
That's
visited,
what happened.
fell in
Yep,
love with it. Yeah, yeah,
yep.
and yeah, we all moved. So my grandparents on my mom's side moved about a year before we did, and then my mom, dad, and I moved together. So it was great. I mean, I love Tennessee. I'd say the main thing I miss about California are, the people and friends that I made over the years. And like the familiarity of California, it's easy, but it's done a lot of changing over the years, so but I'm loving being in Tennessee and where I'm at.
Noah, cannot thank you enough for coming on for a half hour and sharing the story with me. Really cool to get it to see a little bit different side of you. Obviously, I've kind of always known you as Wayne's son and involved in Kiwi 2 and that side of it. Appreciate you sharing your expertise and the knowledge you've gained, not just, as the son of a guy in the industry. So really appreciate you taking the time and coming and spending time on Stories Behind the Door.
Of course. Well, thanks for having me.
I want to give one more shout out to the whole team at Kiwi 2. As I mentioned earlier, 30 plus, you've heard through the whole podcast that, just tremendous respect in the industry. And a big piece of why I think that's been is their motto of when they say something's going to get done, it gets done. And when the phone needs to be picked up and a call needs to be made, even if it's a tough call, as a company, they're going to do it. You can go to kiwisteel.com if you have any ground up development projects. As Noah said, boat and RV, I left that one out. Small bay industrial or self-storage, they are the team that will help you get your project out of the ground. He is Noah Woolsey, business development at Kiwi 2. I'm your host, Thaddeus Campbell. That's it for this week's edition of Stories Behind the Door podcast. We'll be back next week.